Hello, my name is Michael Holmes from Homebuilding and Renovating, and today I'm with Peter Richardson of Senec International Insurance Services, the name behind the well-known brand Self-Build Zone. And we're going to be finding out what renovators, converters and home improvers need to know about site risks insurance. For somebody renovating or extending their own home, do they need a specialist insurance product to protect them against risk?
Yes, they do. In the same way as a new build, certainly all of the new works, materials on site coming to site should be covered by a site insurance policy. The only real difference between the two is that it will involve an existing structure of some description, whether it's a house or whether it's a barn being converted or a religious building. There's a structure involved. So the self-builder needs to think about what they're doing to cover that building. If it's a home, some building insurers may cover it. They need to check with their building insurer, make sure what they'll cover, what they won't cover. Many will say, no, they won't cover it, in which case we will cover it under our policy whilst the works are going on, and they can always go back to that insurer once the work is complete, or we can help them find a different policy. There are some insurers who will cover it, either in full or by restricting the cover available. So the self-builder needs to really make sure that they've got as wide a cover as possible for them.
For somebody undertaking home improvements, is there a particular scale of project that triggers the need to have all risks insurance?
If it's just replacement windows, maybe not, but if it's a full refurb, new kitchens, new bathrooms, new windows, maybe moving walls around, that sort of stuff, then certainly you need to have something in place to cover the risks that go with that.
And would that be called a renovation insurance, or what would?
It's called renovation insurance, but it really is no different to a site insurance policy. The covers are the same, the risks are essentially the same, it just involves an existing structure.
For somebody who's renovating and considering taking out site insurance, what are the risks they're protecting themselves against?
They protect themselves against damage to the existing structure, whether the damage occurs at a part of the building that isn't being worked upon, it would still be covered. They're also covering themselves against the risk of the new materials being stolen off site, people being injured on site, tools and equipment being stolen off site.
Are there any types of home improvement project that wouldn't be covered or that you couldn't take out insurance against?
No, we can cover anything from just a simple refurbishment, extension, loft conversion. We've even had projects where they've created a new basement within the project. So we can cover anything you're going to do. We will look at some of it and decide whether or not we need somebody with experience to be doing that work, or whether it would be okay that a self-builder went on and did it. So, say for example, creating a new basement, we would never cover anybody to do it themselves. We would expect them to get a professional contractor, basement contractor, who's separately insured, who has experience to do that sort of work. Because the last thing you want to do is creating a basement in the middle of a terrace and find that the houses either side collapsing as a result of you undermining their foundations.
For a renovation insurance, what factors influence the insurance premium?
If they're going to insure the existing structure with us, we need to know what the reinstatement value of that is and also what the professional reinstatement cost of the new works will be. And by that we mean having a builder do it, not what it's costing the self-builder to do it. And then we look at what owned plant is required, what hired plant is required, and those are essentially the points at which we determine the premium.
Is the premium affected by who's undertaking the building work?
The premium's not affected, but the terms of the policy may be. If it's complex work, we would look for somebody with experience to be doing it. So whether that's retaining walls, new basements, anything that's structural to the property, we would expect somebody with experience to be doing that work. If it's less important work, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way, then we don't mind if the self-builder has a go themselves.
For somebody undertaking home improvements and moving out of their home and handing it over to the builders, will they need to take out site risks insurance?
Yes. The builder won't take any responsibility for the existing home. If they have got the right sort of policy in place to cover the new works, that's a separate question. But certainly the builder will take no responsibility for the existing structure, and the homeowner would need to continue to insure that building. And if their existing building insurer will not cover it, they will need to find a mechanism to do so.
And what about people's contents? They've moved out, handed the home over to the builders, but left their furniture and their possessions in the house. Can they insure those contents as well?
That's a conversation they need to have with their contents insurers. We wouldn't cover it under our site insurance policy at all. It would be something they'd have to negotiate with the home contents insurer.
So for home improvers who are already living in the property, you would have site risk insurance running in parallel with your regular buildings and contents insurance?
So yeah, certainly the contents insurance, as I said, the buildings one will depend on what the buildings insurer is prepared to offer as cover during the works.
If somebody's having home improvements undertaken to their home and there's some damage to the existing property, would that be covered by the site risk insurance or their buildings and contents insurance?
Again, it depends on what cover the existing building insurer is prepared to give. If they're going to limit cover to, let's say, fire, lightning, explosion, aircraft only, which is typical, and it's an accidental damage to the building, then it won't be covered by the existing building insurer. If they haven't bought site insurance to include their existing structure, then they're on their own in terms of repairing their building.
If somebody is buying a property to improve and won't be moving in for several months until the work starts, what sort of cover should they take out?
Okay, so if the building's just going to be empty for several months, they need to have unoccupied buildings insurance. Site insurance is not appropriate at this point. They just need to insure the building. Those sorts of policies are available. It's a lot more expensive than normal buildings insurance, but obviously the risks are higher for the insurer because it's an empty building. They could have burst pipes. Anything could happen without it being seen at an early stage.
If somebody were buying a property to convert, such as a barn or an old school, what sort of cover would they need to take out, and at what stage would they need to arrange cover?
Again, if they're not going to start the works for several months, they would need an unoccupied buildings insurance policy. If it's going to be starting within 90 days, then they could take out a renovation or conversion site insurance policy, which would cover the existing structure and then all the elements that we cover in terms of a new build site insurance.
There are some specific risks involved with renovation. For instance, with a barn conversion, should the existing structure burn down or somehow collapse, your planning permission goes with it. Is that a risk that you can insure against?
Not with site insurance. The barn burning down, yes, that could be covered by a buildings insurance policy, but in terms of loss of planning, that's not covered by site insurance. That's a separate legal indemnity policy called loss of planning, and operates in a completely different way to a site insurance policy.
So in the eventuality that the local authorities say we only allowed a new house there because there was an existing structure, now that structure's gone, you can't have a new house there, that is insurable?
It is insurable, yes, but not with site insurance.
Sometimes when buying a existing property or a plot to develop, the access is over third-party land and there isn't necessarily any written evidence that that access is legally enforceable, yet it has been used historically for some time. Is that something that can be insured against?
It can be. It's a little bit more tricky to do so, depending on who owns that land, whether it's owned by a private individual, whether it's part of a private lane, let's say, where all of the residents own it. But it can be done. It is a little bit more tricky, yes.
Another risk that people often come across when buying an existing house to renovate or convert is a restrictive covenant that limits their ability to extend or alter the existing dwelling. Sometimes those covenants are very old and perhaps haven't been enforced, but nonetheless they're cautious. Is that a risk they can insure against?
Yes, they can. It's not covered by site insurance, it's covered by a separate restrictive covenant policy. There's a number of questions that need to be asked essentially, is anybody around that's still a beneficiary of that covenant, for example, that could enforce it? But generally it is insurable, yes.